Welcome, everybody, to the Out of Home Insider Show, a podcast like no other, hosted by the one and only Tim Rowe. Get ready to have some knowledge dropped on you and to be entertained, because nothing's more valuable than food for your brain. So sit back, relax, we're about to dive in as the best industry podcast is about to begin.
And we're recording. And usually like a good place to start is kind of the origin story. How did you get in out of home?
Well, it's a long story.
We've got time.
All right. Well, to help you understand how I got into out of home, it probably helps to understand like where I come from.
Yeah.
I started out studying electrical engineering. I switched to computer science my first senior year. There were a few more senior years after that. But it was 1999, and I could code, and people wanted code, and so I started working on projects. This was probably my sophomore year in college.
Okay.
And before I knew it, I just sort of fallen backwards into entrepreneurship. I could code, people asked for it, so I started charging money, and suddenly I had this little agency that I was running. And a couple years later, I graduated and started doing that agency full time. I learned a lot of really good things running that agency. A couple of the things that stand out are that you can make good money, being a software developer and working for yourself. The flip side of that, though, is that you never get off the treadmill running an agency.
You're always having to find that next job.
Yeah, exactly. It's an hourly rate job still, and I could see the projects that I was working on for people, and those people were taking those applications that I built and started making money in their sleep from them. And they paid me a handsome hourly rate, but that was it.
Sure.
Like, as soon as I stopped typing, I stopped getting paid.
You didn't get any more money.
Right. And so I quickly realized that I wanted to build my own projects. Right. I could code, and the piece that was missing was owning the thing that I coded. And so I started looking for projects that I could work on and own. And the first one that came along was actually with one of our software partners, one of our customers. They were a river rafting outfitter, and when they first came to us, they were still doing stuff on paper. Like, you remember those big paper desk calendars?
Oh yeah,
it's like 3 feet wide and has the weeks across it and the days down.
The secretary comes around once a year and asks everyone, "Do you want one of these?" And everyone says yes. And then like a week later, you're like, "Why is this thing on my desk?" It's
yeah. So they were still like booking trips out and scheduling them on these big paper calendars.
Wow. And this was how recent?
This would have been late 90s, early 2000s.
Okay, so recent enough that there were better ways to do it.
There certainly were, yeah. And so they came to us, and by the way, they were also doing the same thing with the boats. So they had these big printouts that somebody had drawn the outline of a boat, and they would write the names where the butts went.
Awesome.
Yeah. And so they came to us, and we started out by just making a brochure website for them. And then we integrated it into a back-end booking system that we had built. So now they could book online and on the phone and in person at the Grand Canyon or Moab or wherever they happen to be. And so we had built this system, and lo and behold, turns out they were like the second biggest river rafting outfitter in the country.
Wow.
And they were state-of-the-art on paper.
Wow.
And so, we realized together that there was an opportunity here to go package this thing up and sell it to all the other outfitters in the country. And so we started doing that. A couple of years later, they bought us out. By then, most of our developers were on that project. And so they effectively bought us out of both companies. Running that company, I had, grown to maybe 15 developers running the agency.
Okay.
And we still just had 2 crappy phone lines from the local telco. So 15 employees serving, all these customers with 2 phone lines. Like, nobody could ever get a hold of us. It was really frustrating for our customers.
This was for folks that are listening. This was the world before cell phones.
Yeah. So back in the day, there was an actual pair of copper wires that went from the phone company to your office.
Imagine 2 tin cans and a string.
Yeah. And so for every phone line that you wanted to have at your office, there was an actual set of wires that had to come. And this was also, early 2000s, and voice over IP was starting to take off. Okay. So I went and priced a system to get a real PBX office system with enough handsets for everybody and be able to put people on hold and transfer calls and really basic stuff, right? And I was pricing it out, and for handsets and the back closet system was going to be like 30 grand.
A month
And
or a year?
No, total. You had to like buy the system.
Just for the hardware.
Yeah. This was just the hardware. And then you still had to go to the phone company and get phone lines to plug into the thing. And so anyway, I wasn't going to pay 30 grand for a phone system. No, I was super cheap. And so I went and downloaded some open source telephony software, a package called Asterisk. We installed it on a retired workstation and spent like $2,000 on the actual phones. And then we were done. Like we had built this voice over IP system. And then when we sold that company, I still had this system that I built, kept a couple of the guys that had worked for me, and we started selling phone systems. And one thing led to another. We kind of invented the hosted telephony space, the hosted PBX space, we'll call it. And that would have been like 2006. And I ran that for a few years, kind of retired from that. Private equity came in, mostly took me out. And I left to go play video games and got married, started having kids, traveled a little bit, all of that. And then, so anyway, that's all context about me. That helps you understand like the next story. So I told you that story so I can tell you this one.
Yeah, listen, I'm already seeing a lot of parallels with the out-of-home space. So I can't wait to hear the hero's journey to within. Yeah.
So one of the other things that I learned running that software agency in the very beginning was I got really, really good at mapping business processes onto software. That was all we did all day long. We would generally take something that some business was doing, and we would shift that capacity for doing that thing from a human onto a machine, right? So they could cut costs, eliminate errors, all of that stuff, right? So I got really good at that process of taking a human process and turning it into a computerized process. And so fast forward after the telco exit and all of that, I was down in southern Utah mountain biking, like a lot of people do in southern Utah, and a friend of mine was on his way back from a conference in Vegas. And so he stopped off at this little town, St. George. It's right across the border from Arizona. And we were grabbing a drink there, and he was still wearing his lanyard from the conference. So we were teasing him about like still being on the clock and all that. And he said, no. But I noticed on the lanyard that it said Yesco. And I didn't know what Yesco was, but I knew that he wasn't Yesco. He was sort of like me, sort of a repeat offender, a serial entrepreneur. Mm-hmm. And I knew he had his own agency. He was doing digital marketing at the time. And so I asked, what's this Yesco? That's not you. And he said, no, that's my client. I was at this conference on behalf of my client. Yesco is the Young Electric Sign Company. That's what Yesco stands for. And if you've been to Vegas, you've seen like all the neon on the strip, like that's Yesco. So Yesco, I don't know if they still are, but at the time they were the biggest custom sign and lighting manufacturer in the world.
Wow.
And so if you like think of the iconic Las Vegas signs, like the Welcome to Vegas, right, or the waving cowboy, like Yesco built all those.
Wow.
So, and so my friend's explaining this to me, and he said, and by the way, they also, like as you were driving down here from northern Utah, you probably drove past a few hundred of their billboards. They also run a billboard plant. And of course we'd seen them all the way down there. And me being the computer guy, I had started noticing the digital screens that had started replacing the static ones, the printed vinyl ones. And I made a really logical assumption that turned out to be exactly true. And that assumption was that these are just computers on a stick next to the freeway. Like that's all it is.
Fundamentally.
Right? It's a computer with a 50-foot screen. Well, I assumed it was a 50-foot screen. It turns out they're 48, but I was pretty dang close.
Pretty close.
Yeah. And so he's like, yeah, that's exactly what it is. In fact, those things run Windows primarily. And at this point, I'm just sort of like me, the computer guy, is like security problems, as soon as he says Windows. That's a different story. But so based on that assumption, though, I made a second assumption, which was, the human race has figured out how to sell computerized advertising space. It's sort of an auction. It looks like Google or Facebook. You have a bunch of advertisers that show up. They want access to the audience, and they configure their campaigns with whatever parameters, how much money they're willing to spend and what time of day and what days of the week or what their customer profile is, all that stuff. And then the algorithms determine what content plays where. And at this point, my buddy's just like chuckling. He's like, no. Sort of figuratively pats me on the head, says, no, that's cute. But if you want to show up on one of those digital screens, you're going to have to commit to 6 months. You're going to fax a contract over. They're going to run a credit check, and it's probably going to run you, I don't know, 20 to 40 grand before you can show up on one of these digital screens. And this is where that stereotypical entrepreneur moment where like your mind is blown, all that stuff was sort of, happening all right then. And it made no sense to me. It seemed so obvious that you have this fundamentally identical medium to online advertising in terms of not in terms of how it works, but in terms of the mechanics. Right? It's a computer, and you're selling fractions of time on the computer screen. Like, we have been doing this for 20 years. Like, somebody could have watched Google for 18 of those years and started doing this 2 years ago. Like, this should have been done by now. Yeah. And so I'm just sitting there like, it seems so obvious to me that I assumed there was some reason, some regulatory reason, or there was some reason that it couldn't be done. And so I let it go.
No
and
kidding.
Didn't do anything.
And when was that?
So that was probably like February of 2015.
Okay.
And
so it was close. It was close to being time. Just it wasn't fully baked yet.
It was getting really close. So I didn't do anything at the time, except that I kept noticing. Like, I kept seeing these screens everywhere, and I called a couple of the billboard companies, and they wouldn't sell me, a week on a sign, let alone a day or an hour or a minute on a sign, which was, the computer shouldn't care. And nobody would do it. And I couldn't find anybody like doing this sort of marketplace style billboard sales approach. And so maybe 6 months later, so probably by September or so, I still hadn't found anything. I call up my buddy. By the way, he's my co-founder now. And I call him up and I said, hey, I can't see why this shouldn't be done already, and nobody's doing it. The folks at Yesco, like, let's set up a meeting. Let's tell them what we think should happen, and they'll tell us why it can't be done. And so he calls up Pat, who's the president of Yesco Outdoor. And we show up at Pat's office, and Pat is exactly who you think Pat should be. Like, he's, mid-60s, like, super nice guy, well put together, has been slinging billboards for like 40 years. Like, I think he actually, this might be apocryphal, but I think he started out painting billboards as a kid because his dad was in the business.
That's so cool.
And so, he was a salesman, and then he was the sales manager, and then he was the sales director, and then the VP, and now he's the president of the company. Like, that is like the classic career trajectory in out of home. And so we're sitting there, these relatively young guys, explaining to Pat, who's the old dog, like, he understands how the billboard industry works. He sits on all of the industry trade group boards and things. Like, he is the man in the industry. And we're sitting here telling him how we think billboards ought to be sold.
Yeah, no, that's fine. That's a good idea and all, but we've got a way cooler way to do it.
Yeah. And so we're sitting there explaining how Facebook works and how Google works, like, from the advertising side. He knows how Facebook, the platform, like the social media platform, works, but we're explaining how the advertising side works and all of that. And luckily, James, my co-founder, he had been doing all of the like SEO and PPC, the digital marketing for Yesco. So he had built some rapport and had a reputation there as an authority. And so Pat, to his credit, like 3 minutes in, he's like, he just pounds his fist on the table and says, "That's the future. Let's go do it." And we're just sitting there like, "You're supposed to tell us why this can't be done."
Yeah. It wasn't supposed to be 3 minutes. This should take much longer. Sit back down.
And so, at that point, we had our first customer, and we went home and started writing code.
Wow.
And a couple of the really important things that Pat taught us in that first conversation were that there was this thing called vacancy rates on these billboards, or occupancy, the inverse, right? And we just assumed that, again, coming from the computerized background, like, all of the space on that sign should be sold, just at lower prices if there's more space, and higher prices if there's less space. And he's like, no. Because of the way that we sell it, it's fixed price, and we're never sold out. Like, that's one of the two like lies that every out-of-home vendor will tell you, is that they're sold out.
Yeah.
But nobody is ever sold out. There are always vacancies. And so if you can go get me $1 for those vacancies, that's $1 more than I had before. And we're like, great, we'll go do it.
Awesome.
So that was like I said, fall of 2015. So we went and started writing code. And on June 6th of 16, we launched on all of Yesco's digital inventory. So they have 4 states worth: Utah, Idaho, Nevada, and Oregon. And we launched on all of their digital inventory. We only did Yesco for the first year. We had to figure out how to actually go and sell the space. We had to figure out how to propagate the content to the remote displays and get proof of performance back, like proof that the image had shown back from the sign, and then build the customers and figure all that stuff out. So for the first year, we kept it really small, just focused on Yesco. But doing that, at the end of that first year, we did a study with Yesco, and we found that we had added 11% to their digital top line revenue.
That's incredible.
With zero cost basis for them, zero.
Right. Like that's a top 1% salesperson that comes with a book of business.
Yeah. Well, and so I don't have any visibility into what their books look like what their net margins are, but the industry averages in out of home for net margins are low teens, right?
Sure.
And so in the first year, from a cold start 0, we probably came very close to doubling their profitability that year from 0.
It's significant. And where did where the business come from then? Is it any different than it is now? And if not, how did you figure the sweet spot for who a Blip client would be?
Yeah. So the other thing that we there was some math that we had to do, which was, the sales approach for digital and vinyl signs was identical. So it was the same contract, same personnel, everything. And we had an idea that would keep, the minimum contract size above a certain threshold, just because you have a salesperson involved and you have creative people involved.
Right.
And in order to pay all those people, you have to be making enough. And so we had assumed it, but we had actually underestimated how few businesses had ever actually been on billboards. So we did some more original research and found that only 2% of businesses had ever been on a billboard. 2%.
Wow.
2%.
Right. In pre-COVID, we had 30 million small businesses and only
30 million small businesses. 2%. And of course, it was the 2% with the largest budgets, right? The most established, sophisticated advertisers have the largest budgets, and they were the ones who were present on the medium. So, historically, it was Ford corporate or the local Ford franchise owner,
right.
But it wasn't, it wasn't Lenny's Used Cars, and it certainly wasn't Joe the Plumber.
Yeah.
Right. And so the vast majority of businesses had never been able to justify the expense of being on a billboard because of the upfront cost, because of the sales methodology. And so we just sort of stumbled into the sweet spot for us, which was the 98% who had never been on a billboard because they couldn't justify the way that it was being packaged, spending that kind of money.
Yeah.
And so we went bottom of the market.
And like, what was some of that early feedback, right? It's interesting, right? So having sold in a local market, and albeit not for a career or anything like that, but I knew what my minimum was to make it worth my day to talk to you. And I was never going to talk to Joe's Pizza. What was that?
That's exactly right. I mean, right? Yeah, that's right. You were a salesman for billboards, right? You were an account executive.
Right.
And you understand intimately that it takes you the same amount of time to sell a $200 contract as a $200,000 contract. And you can make enough in commission off the $200,000 contract to put groceries on the table. You can't physically string together enough $200 deals to actually make a living. And so you have no choice but to ignore that segment of the market. And for our part, I mean, we took that capacity and moved it onto a machine. So people could come and self-serve, and we had no difference in cost. Like we had effectively no cost basis beyond just the marketing to find the people.
Sure.
But for actually executing the deals, there was zero cost. It was just computers doing their thing.
Yeah.
And so it didn't make any difference to us, profitability wise, whether it was $101 contracts or one $100 contract.
And something, and Chad and I, and for folks that don't know, Chad Smith is a rock star on the Blip team. We were talking about something that I think might be a misconception, and it's that, right, like you help grow accounts too. Like some advertisers might start out only spending $100 a month, but they can grow into real sizable accounts for a lot of companies.
Exactly right. That's exactly right. And if you are the type of company who's advertising in a fairly isolated region, and you have the type of budget where you can afford a traditional billboard contract, honestly, you're probably better served getting a traditional contract. It's going to be cheaper.
Right.
Part of the value that we bring is that we fractionalize that space on a sign. You can buy any unit you want, any unit of space that you want for as long as you want. And it does wind up costing more. It's like if you buy toilet paper at 7-Eleven, the price per roll is higher than if you buy it at Costco, but the total bill is lower.
Right.
If that makes sense. You go and buy 4 rolls instead of 40 rolls.
And what is it that small business owners love about Blip?
Yeah, the flexibility is one of the things they always point to. They can turn it on when they want, they can turn it off when they want. One of the issues that we have though is with helping those advertisers understand that turning it off and on a bunch isn't going to help their campaign. It's not going to help their business. What they should do instead of like spending 1 week and turning it off the next week, is just spend half as much across both weeks.
Right.
Slow and steady. Like I'm preaching to the choir here. I'm sure you probably explain this to hundreds of clients over the years. Like you want frequency and reach. You want to target the audience that you're going after, and then just pound it. Be there day in and day out forever, being there. And our advertisers, they don't have to commit to even 1/8 of the space on a traditional digital billboard. They can wind up with 1,000th of the space and just run it over months and still start to see similar results. Just at a scale that makes sense for them.
And that's huge, right? The education piece of just like, hey, you can buy it really inexpensive relative to your budget and on the terms that you need as a small business owner, the flexibility, the ability to turn it on and off. How about like, right? Because this is an industry hot button issue, but like around measurement, I got to imagine small businesses with small budgets, they're like, all right, how do I measure this? And Blip does a really good job of visualizing. Here's how many plays you got. Here's how many impressions. Like, just talk about the measurement thing for a second. I think you do an excellent job of visualizing it, but how does that?
We do okay. You're very kind, but we do okay.
Excellent relative. Like I've been a fan of
relative
Blip
terms. It's all relative,
right? For like a year because I was able to log in and just do.
To your point, stuff. Measurement is one of the things that the industry does very badly. Mm-hmm. They're pushing hard now to try to improve the quality of measurement and the meaning behind the measurement.
Yeah.
But it's something that hasn't historically been the responsibility of the industry. It's typically been performed, measurement and attribution has been performed by the CMO's office of the advertising company, not the out-of-home company. And most of the companies that could afford billboards had a CMO with a staff and sophistication and machines. And they could do all of that. They could plan and measure and optimize. And now as we've introduced a whole new generation of billboard advertisers, these advertisers don't have a CMO or a CMO's office. Mm-hmm. They don't have those sophisticated tools. In fact, if they've been advertising at all, it's only been online. And online advertising has been very effective at conditioning those advertisers to expect what I'll call shallow attribution. It's like, did that person click your site or not? Right? You gave Google $1, and how many leads did you get for it? Right? It's funny. It's not even same day like ROI. It's not even same day ROI calculations. It's like same hour ROI calculations. Like literally, you put your dollar into the vending machine, and within a couple of minutes, exactly, you got to click out of it, right? And so that is one area where we and the industry at large have a lot of work still to do, is in helping educate these advertisers that billboards don't work like online advertising. Online advertising is clickable inherently, or tappable if you're on a mobile device, I suppose. But like, who can click on a billboard? You can't. Who can even dial the phone number on a billboard when you're driving past at 80 miles an hour? You can't. That's not how billboards work. Billboards are a broadcast medium. Yep. It's not a direct response medium. The one narrow exception is Exit Now. Like that's the only direct response billboard that ever works. It's like McDonald's, this exit.
So I'll tell you a funny story. So because like in my heart of heart, I've got a lot of Dan Kennedy for any of the direct response folks. I got a lot of Dan Kennedy laying around this place. But I wanted to see, can I generate leads from billboards? So I bought a URL, winfreecigars.com. And the creative, I got to say, I thought it was pretty good. It was like a gorilla smoking a cigar with some smoke. It looked cool. And I ran it on Blip at the time, and this has since been corrected, but at the time you could run for $1 a day, right, all the way back in 2020. And I ran, I don't know, I think I threw like $20 at just to see, like, will someone go to this website and take an action? And sure enough, at around $4.17 spent, I generated a lead. And like that's interesting, right? So I totally agree. It's a broadcast medium, but Blip made it accessible and easy to, like, as a marketer, let me just go test something. Do you get? Well,
and to our credit, we've made the mechanics familiar enough that you could figure it out. Like if you've done online advertising, the mechanics are similar. Yeah. There's still some theory and some logic that you need to pick up, like how to use billboards, period. Right. But at least you don't have to figure out how to get your stuff onto a billboard.
Correct.
Like if you've done AdWords or Facebook, it feels very familiar.
Very, very. And so here's the $1 question. How'd you come up with the Blip idea? Blip.
So we had a part-time employee at the time, and he said, Blip, like billboard flip, Blip. We're like, good enough, let's go. So the rest of the story is kind of funny. Yeah, the rest of the story is kind of funny. So we had this idea, we had the software mostly built, and we had a launch date picked, and we still hadn't come up with a name for the company. And we had to like incorporate and get business licenses and all of this stuff. And so we had to come up with something. And so we just like, I just came up with a name, and it was the silliest thing I could come up with. We decided to call it Acme Intergalactic.
That's awesome.
So it's generic yet hyperbolic.
Right. It's very ironic.
Yeah. And so the name of the company is technically Acme Intergalactic.
That's awesome.
And we started out just DBAing, doing business as Blip, and then we actually did create a separate LLC, Blip Operations, which the marketplace resides within now.
That's
so
very cool.
Acme owns Blip technically, but on the first day it was Acme Intergalactic.
It's so strong. At some point we got to do like a swag release, a limited edition Acme Intergalactic swag release.
Yeah, it's much punchier than Blip, isn't it?
Yeah, I dig it. Blip for short. What's the number one misconception about you guys? Like I could place my guess, but I'm more curious to hear from you. What do people get wrong about?
Yeah, so we have two different customers, keep in mind too. So we have advertisers and we have sign owners. They're both our customers. So I would say that the common misconceptions are different for those two categories. On the sign owner side, on the vendor side, the most common misconception is probably that we're somehow competitive with their traditional sales efforts.
Yeah.
Like I said, our advertisers, they have never been on billboards. We're not taking deals away from the salespeople. We're bringing new people and new money to the medium.
Yeah.
We did some more research and found that 94% of our advertisers had never been on a billboard.
Wow. Okay. Like that's a good, because, right. So having been in those sales meetings where it's like, hey, there's this new thing called Adomni, and there's this new thing called Vistar, and there's this new thing.
And it feels threatening, doesn't it? Like anybody else selling my inventory, that feels like a threat.
And I'm sitting there like, this is awesome. Market efficiency. Yes, let's go. But every 25-year media rep with a $1 million book of business is like, no, I don't want them selling my inventory. Yeah. Like there's friction. There's friction. Yeah. So that's probably the biggest misconception. And it's a complete miss too. It's completely unfounded. It's found money. This is all found. It is. Money.
It's completely novel income. What we've actually found is that our media owner partners, when they roll out Blip, they do make significantly more money than they did before. And generally what they do is use it to build more inventory or to convert from statics to digitals. And so what we find is that when we show up, we're not taking jobs away from salespeople. They have to go hire more salespeople.
Wow.
So biggest misconception on the inventory side is that we're somehow taking money away from the salespeople, and the opposite is true.
Yeah.
On the advertiser side, I would say the biggest misconception is what I described already, that they expect it to act just like online advertising. Like, I'm going to put my dollar into Blip, and tomorrow somebody better call the phone number I put on the billboard.
And mention the billboard that they saw.
Right. And so the advertisers expect there to be a very simplistic one-dimensional attribution model for billboards, and they don't work that way. Billboards are about statistics and probabilities and averages across large populations over long periods of time. Like there is no one-to-one mapping like you get conveniently from Google or Facebook, where they can show you put your dollar in, this person saw the ad, they clicked on it, they got to your cart, and they exited, like they transacted. And that does not exist for a billboard, nor should it. That shouldn't be what we go for. We should be doing it at scale over long periods of time and measuring the impact on the broader population, not on the individual. We shouldn't be targeting the individual, because every ad that we show isn't seen by one person like an online ad.
Right.
It's broadcast. It's seen by hundreds or thousands of people, every ad that we show. And you can know broadly, like demographically, what the profile of, in aggregate, the people are that are seeing that ad, without actually querying their devices or getting creepy about their privacy. Or like, you don't have to know who they are or who the person is or what they like. You can know broadly and statistically accurately across the population, the swath of people that is driving past, that sign on the freeway at 8 a.m. on their way to work.
What are you most excited about in 21?
I'm excited to see where the new normal settles in. COVID was gut wrenching for the entire industry. Like the out of home industry went from like full throttle to full stop in like a week. And
right, and we were like hitting full throttle on a runway. Like we had plenty of room to just leave this thing wide open and keep it running.
And then suddenly, like that runway was a cliff after all.
Right. And you're like, oh no.
Yeah, and so it was a really up and down year for the entire industry, and we were no different. Like I think we followed a similar trajectory where at the end of March, beginning of April, our revenue tanked. Like it was really hard to watch, And then it leveled off at the new lower levels, and then it's been coming back very well. Like it's been growing strongly since about May. And so I'm excited to see as advertisers and the public broadly gets accustomed to whatever the new normal is, whether it's with a vaccine and COVID's a thing of the past, or that we just take measures and have to deal with it on. I don't know where that's going to go, but I think this year will be the year that we like go one way or the other. We either kill the thing or we just accept that it's here and move on. And we'll figure out how we coexist, and things will that'll be the new normal. We'll either get back to the old or into the new. So that's what I'm excited for, is just to know something again, rather than to sit here wondering what it is that in what way is the world going to melt down next week.
I think that's a great place to end it on, is pondering on what this will all look like in a few months as it starts to get warmer and life starts to return to everything outside, and people are getting ready to just get out of their homes, right? We've been pent up for a year at that point. I think it's going to be a really unique opportunity for out of home, and looking forward to it as well.
Yeah.
Where do people go to find more out about Blip? What's Blip working on? Where should folks follow you? Are you active on social?
Personally, I'm not. So
all good.
Well, to my credit, I was one of the first people on Facebook and one of the first people off.
Right. You were on Facebook for longer than people have been alive.
Well, and I've been off of Facebook longer than the average Facebook user has been on.
How about that? So there you go. All right. So to learn about Blip, we're going to
blipbillboards.com.
Easy.
You can find out all about the business there.
Very cool. We'll link out below. Brent, thanks so much for doing this. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I enjoyed it.
Well, hey, if you found this to be helpful, please share it with somebody else who could benefit. As always, make sure to smash the subscribe button down below in the corner. We'll see you guys next time.